it one last time. Thank you, McKenna. And one last time, we'll ask people if you could keep your cameras off and your microphones muted while Dr. Chief is speaking. That would be great. We'll have questions at the end. And you can also ask questions to myself and to McKenna Larange by the chat feature during the talk if you would like. And I will turn it over to Phil Brown to ask if he would please introduce Dr. Chief.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for attending, and thank you so much, Dr. Chief, for speaking with us. I'm especially honored here because it's the second time that I get to introduce her. 5 years ago, which seems an eternity, we had the 50th anniversary of NIEHS, and she was a keynote speaker. And I was very, very honored to be able to introduce her then, as I am again today. So she is from the Diné. She's an associate professor and extension specialist in the Department of Environmental Science at the University of Arizona. And in that work, she brings together relevant water science to Native American communities in a culturally sensitive manner. Two of her primary tribal projects are the Pyramid Lake Paiute Tribe Climate Adaptation and Traditional Knowledge Project and Gold King Mine Spill Diné Exposure Project. In partnership with Diné College, Dr. Chief leads the NSF Indigenous Food, Energy, and Water Security and Sovereignty Program and is training countless 39 graduate students in their vision to develop a diverse workforce with intercultural awareness and expertise in sustainable food, energy, and water systems, especially through off-grid technologies to address the lack of safe water, energy, and food security in Indigenous communities. Dr. Chief received a BS and MS in Civil and Environmental Engineering from Stanford in 1998 and 2000, and her PhD in Hydrology and Water Resources from Arizona in 2007. So on behalf of Protect, I welcome you, and we are so happy to have you speak with us today.
I want to make sure my screen is showing the correct presentation mode.
Yeah, you'll just want to switch it to right. Yeah, I think you're going up to the right area if I saw your. Right now it's showing both of your slides. Great, now it looks good.
Thank you so much for having me here today. And today I wanted to speak on the project that we had with the Gold King Mine Spill Diné Exposure Project and how it impacted the Navajo Nation. So on August 5th, 3 million gallons of acid mine drainage was released from the Gold King Mine near Silverton, Colorado, and was released and went into the Animas River, which eventually went into New Mexico and joined through the San Juan River, which is a river located on the Navajo Nation. And the first community that uses this river for irrigation is Upper Fruitland, New Mexico. And it went down to several Navajo farming communities along this area, all which have extensive irrigation system diverting water from the San Juan River. And this area on the Navajo Nation is considered the breadbasket of the Navajo Nation. There are quite a number of farming activities that go on in this region, as well as its association with Navajo culture. And every year at the end of the harvest season, there is a large celebration that occurs that begins the winter season. And so there's a lot of cultural associations with just the farming activities there. And then Shiprock is the second community we worked with who decided not to use the river again for 1 year, even after the Navajo Nation declared the water to meet agricultural standards of use. And their reason was because they needed more information. They still had a lot of questions that were unanswered. And so they decided to allow their farms to go fallow for a year until they could get some information. The Salmon River then flows northeast into Utah, passing through the Four Corners region of the Southwest, and goes through our next community that we worked with, which is NS Utah. And NS Utah is not like a farming community like the others that I mentioned, but rather they relied on groundwater wells near the Salmon River. And at the time, immediately after the spill, there were some concerns that the cone of influence from those groundwater wells would include drawing from the river. And so these are three very different communities that all were impacted by the spill, and their response was different in different ways. So the University of Arizona Community Engagement Corps have been doing tribal outreach for many years prior to the spill. In particular, I am the PI of the CEC, and in my work, I developed learning modules focused on mining topics, remediation topics that were identified by the tribe being impacted by mining as a topic that was important to them. So we worked with the tribal colleges to develop these learning modules. And for example, I have one here that is on copper mining that was developed for the Tohono O'odham Community College. And that tribe, the Tohono O'odham, has an extensive copper mining that has happened in their history and presently. So with Tohono O'odham, we began a lot of these work on learning modules focused on copper mining and process, reclamation, environmental impacts of mining, and social impacts of mining. So just before the spill, we had started working with Diné College, and we developed a uranium mining module with them because uranium was has a very big impact on the Navajo Nation. So this really fostered our partnership with the tribal college, as well as to gain that trust with the tribe. Another part of our partnership building also occurred through the extension that I do as an extension specialist. For example, working with the Indian Cooperative Extension to participate in many of the trainings that they hold. So, for example, this is the Shiprock Agricultural Days in March 2015, which was prior, months before the spill. And this is the ongoing workshop that happens annually where Navajo farmers learn about all different types of farming topics. So I have been presenting in these for many years prior to the spill. So in that year, 2 days after the spill, the Navajo Nation president invited me to a meeting because he was just newly elected and wanted a debriefing on all the various activities, partnerships going on with the Navajo Nation. And I came there to talk about my work on climate change impacts on tribes. And it was at that meeting that the Navajo EPA asked me what the University of Arizona thought about the impact of the Gold Key mine spill on the Navajo Nation. Now, at that time, I didn't even know that the spill had occurred, and the Navajo Nation had just been notified that day that the spill had occurred. So I wasn't privy to this incident. It wasn't until Monday that I realized, I learned from the news what had happened, and realized what the Navajo Nation EPA director was asking me. So the Indian Cooperative Extension has been really critical in our partnership with the Navajo Nation in responding to the spill and directing our community-driven research project. So at the University of Arizona, we are a land grant institution, which means that we have a mission to connect with communities in the state of Arizona and to bring the science to the people through community-driven projects and community-driven research questions. So we have a full-time tribal extension agent that lives on tribal lands, not all the tribal lands, but there's a list here, and they execute different types of extension programming. So I work particularly with Diné College, who was based in Shiprock, New Mexico, in response to the spill. This is Diné right here. And Diné was attending the various meetings related to the spill, and she got a really good understanding of what the people's concerns were. And through our communication, we began to understand that the people were concerned about the impact of the water. They felt like it was going to impact their culture, their ceremony, the future of their children. And so during this time, it was very tense, very stressful for the people, because they have by this time invested a lot into preparing their fields, and many had already planted. And now suddenly the irrigation canals were shut down. And so many of the people in the communities primarily are elders, and they primarily speak Navajo, especially at the local government chapter level. So there are many meetings going on held by both the Navajo Nation and the various regulatory agencies to update the community about the spill. However, we found out through Diné College that there was a lot of confusion and mistrust, and people were not understanding what the data and the various materials that were being presented to them. So that's where we became involved. And shortly after the spill, we did an interview on the local media station to talk about the spill. And based on the questions that were frequently asked at the community meetings, we developed a fact sheet within 2 weeks of the spill. And this fact sheet was simply to address the various questions and provide basic information about mining, abandoned mines, the history of the region, acid mine drainage, why the water is yellow, and so forth. And so this fact sheet was provided to the Navajo farmers in the community meeting. So after the spill had occurred, I followed up back with the Navajo EPA director and offered our assistance regarding his question and how the University of Arizona could assist. And the Navajo Nation EPA invited us to write concept proposals about the Gold Key mine spill. So we submitted two. One was focused on more of the fate and transport, and the other one was more environmental health focused. And the Navajo Nation picked the one focused on the environmental health. What was going to be the impact to the Navajo people as a result of the spill? So once we got the invitation, we had to go through the Navajo Nation Human Research Review Board, which is a board that oversees all human subjects research on the Navajo Nation. So in addition to our university IRB approval, we also went through this approval process, which requires extensive community trust building, community approvals before the application is even screened. And throughout the entire project, the board oversees data that's collected, any kind of dissemination of the information, which primarily they prioritize that the community receive the information before it's presented at conferences. And then also they really emphasize what is the benefit to the Navajo Nation, and are Navajo students involved in the project itself. So now I wanted to talk about the goals of the project. The goals of the project were to understand the short-term exposure of the spill. What was the short-term exposure of the Navajo people to the spill? And then also assess the extent of the presence of arsenic and lead in the environment for 1 year. And then finally understand the risk perception of the communities to the spill. One of our primary hypotheses was that the Navajo citizens living in this area had a lot more exposure pathways than what was presented by the regulatory agencies in their risk assessment. And this is due to knowing that the Navajo people really depend on the land for their livelihoods, as well as having a deep connection, both spiritually and culturally, to the places in which they live in. So in building the trust around this project, we did many community presentations to talk about the project, to seek their input on the research questions, understand what sites were of most concern, and how they would like to be informed. We also held listening sessions, and in these listening sessions, we asked the people to share with us what their concerns were. And in the listening session, we learned that the people do not trust research, especially because their livelihoods and perspectives are not considered. They also fear that the water is not safe. They're concerned about the future impacts of the river. They're also frustrated that there are no decision-making protocols, and they fear that the data will not come back to them. So we conducted biomonitoring sample in the 3 communities within 1 year of the spill, which included going to homes to measure lead and arsenic in personal samples that were given, as well as collect household environmental samples to parse out the other potential exposure that might be occurring besides possibly the spills. So we were glad to see that the results were good, and this is a chart that shows the overall household results. And it's color-coded according to the traffic light. So green is that it met the standard, yellow needs more information, and red is beware. So for the different median, blood, urine, drinking water, yard soil, and household dust, they're color-coded according to this. And you can see that majority of the results are green, meaning that they're okay, except for urine, which we found that the people are slightly more exposed to arsenic than other people in the US. So when you compare it to the NHANES 90th percentile, which is 2 out of 100 are above the US level, in the Navajo communities, it's about 5 out of 100. And I'm not going to go into details about this part of it, but it's primarily attributed to individuals in the Annis Puyallup community, where they rely on non-potable sources that have arsenic laden waters. Another thing we quantified in the study was the number of activities that the people engage in along the San Juan River, which links directly to the exposure pathways that the community has and is important for risk assessment. And we found that there are over 40 different activities that the people engaged with. Cultural and spiritual activities were by far the highest number, followed by recreation. The other two activities were livelihood and arts and crafts. And the Diné people, they engage in many different types of cultural and spiritual activities, including prayers that involve plants and sediment that are along the riparian corridor of the San Juan River. So people often put sediments on their face, for example, for prayers and for daily sun protection. So in addition to the risk assessment that we did, we also did a risk perception survey. And the risk perception was to understand what the people perceived as their risk to reusing the San Juan River. And this was a survey that was conducted with 59 Navajo households. And in partnership with the Navajo Community Health Representatives, they were administered. So the demographics of those that were surveyed was that the average age was 49 years of age, spanning from 18 to 84. But they were more or less equally distributed across the different age groups. There were more female than there were male. So what we found was that we asked individuals, generally their risk perception was for different activities such as playing basketball, herding sheep, hunting, and so forth. So what the people did was they ranked these different activities according to their own risk perception. And we found that the higher risk perceptions included driving a car at night, riding in a car on the windy road, or drinking alcohol. And so we compared this to understanding the risk perception to the San Juan River. So we asked what the people thought their risk was to the Gold Key mine spill before and after the Gold Key mine spill. And just to note that the survey was done after the spill, and so this is a recollection for the individuals for before the spill. And so for all the activities related to the San Juan River, such as drinking water from the San Juan River, swimming in the river, fishing in the river, farming, or using the San Juan River for livestock, they all increased in risk perception, almost double or more after the spill. We also asked the people about their risk perception related to activities related to the San Juan River. For example, eating crops irrigated with the San Juan River, eating sheep who drank from the river, eating wild game who live along the river, using plants along the river, using San Juan River for irrigation water or spiritual purposes, and then drinking water from local wells. And again, we see that the average risk perception was also multiplied twofold after the spill. One of our primary goals in this project was to build a capacity of the community in any way that we can. And this was also something that was important to the Navajo Nation IRB. And they want to see Navajo students involved in the project, co-authoring papers, getting their degrees as a result of the project, and just being involved. So we worked with Diné College every year through their tribal colleges university program, STEM 2020, which focused on environmental methods and monitoring. So it's a 10-week program that is similar to an undergraduate research model. Another thing that we really focused on was to ensure that our communication was consistent across the different projects or partners or invitees that we brought to community events, to ensure that we're all using the same terms for the various scientific terms in Navajo. Because some of the confusion early on was that people were using different terms and there was no standardized terminology. So for example, when we did our outreach, we invited other universities working in this area, and we used the same translator, or if they had a translator, we provided this sheet for them so that, you know, they understand what terms we're using as well as to the community. Also, another thing we did was we made sure that we explained what PPVs is. So when we first started doing our presentation, there was a question that immediately came up where one individual asked, what is PPVs? So we use an analogy that most people are familiar with because many people haul water for drinking water and livestock, and they use these 50-gallon drums. So we explained that 1 part per billion is similar to 1 drop of dye in 250 water barrels. Sorry about that. We also use visual illustrations to communicate the differences in standards of different uses, because this was also something that was created confusion for the people where people were not familiar with the different standards of use. And so we explained this visually by showing that agriculture has a much higher toleration for, say, for instance, lead than would be for drinking. And we had a discussion about how they compare and why the standards of use were different for these different uses. We also worked with our Navajo cultural experts to improve our science communication that was more effective than the typical science communication that we are familiar in a Western audience. So we did some of our own literature, and we found that in Alaskan Native communities, they use environmental pictographs to explain environmental results. And so we did the same, and we used shapes to explain the sample type. So for example, a square is a canal, a circle is a river sample, and a triangle is a well sample. And these were color-coded blue, yellow, and red to show how they met or did not meet a certain standard. So this example is for samples that were collected in the river, the Sawa River, for winter, spring, and summer. And you can see, you know, visually many different types of shapes, but what jumps out visually is the 4 circles that are yellow. And that is that 4 of the 29 spring river samples were above the NOAA Squirts Aquatic Guidelines for this particular example. We also continue to present at Shiprock Ad Days, and we also invited other researchers, other Navajo entities doing work in this area to present their results to the community as well. And we make sure to include a lot of time for question and answer, discussion, dialogue, and we made our presentation short so that we could have time for really digging into the results and tried to make it less like a lecture, but more of a community forum. At one of these community forums, one of the elders in the audience said she wanted to know what was happening to her corn from the moment she planted into her soil to the moment that she harvested that corn. So from that question, Diné College and the University of Arizona developed a Farming is Life citizen science program, which is called or Seed to Harvest program. And so Diné College led it in partnership with us, and they recruited 10 farmers to monitor their corn, water, and soil for one harvest season. And this allowed the community to really understand what they were planting, what were the results, learn about the sampling, processing of the samples. And then all of this information was put into a Water Reporter app, which was available to the people. We also supported opportunities for tribal college students to learn from other members of the community. And in this photo, you see both representatives doing some filtering and data collection. And the Navajo Health Navajo Health representatives are individuals that were first responders during the spill, and so they knew on the ground what had happened, how people reacted, what they did in their response, along with the Navajo Nation. And so this was the opportunity to share knowledge within the community and to inspire the tribal college students about the role of somebody in their own community. And then likewise, the community health representative learned how to do environmental methods, monitoring and data analysis, along with the tribal college student who is pursuing a degree in environmental science. So one of the things that we ensured in our work was that we shared the information with the Navajo leadership, and we did this in a variety of different ways. But one of the things that we did was conducted executive sessions throughout the project time where we reported the results to the leaders, had dialogue with the leaders. We looked at different case studies. The various tribal managers talked about their response, what they were doing to respond to the spill and the concerns. And it was also an opportunity for the Navajo community citizens to talk with the leaders on this very important subject. We also took the Navajo community members and the tribal leaders to the site of the Gold Key mine spill. And as part of that, we also were able to share stories across the watershed. So in going up to the upper watershed, the Navajo community members had an opportunity to hear about the impact of the spill on non-Indigenous residents and how they responded, and to learn more about their programs and just the upper watershed in general. And then the non-Indigenous upper watershed residents came down to the Navajo Nation and got to hear about the impact of the spill. So it was a nice opportunity for for understanding to occur in how different people were impacted by the spill. One of the things that we learned was that there was a need to disseminate the results of the spill to the wider Navajo Nation because of the stigma that had been created that was associated with the spill and growing crops along the San Juan River. So one way we did this was through radio forums. We held several radio forums and invited other partners who were working on the spill on different research projects to share what they were doing, and also had the CHR director, one of our Navajo grassroots partner come on the line. And this was broadcast to the entire Navajo Nation, and callers could call in and ask questions, and it engaged us in a dialogue with people outside of the impacted area. Throughout our project, our goal was to develop a community-based model for emergency response that was based on the Diné culture and Diné values of having harmony, restoration, and healing. In addition, the Navajo people already have a framework for problem solving. And so we were mentored by community members, traditional leaders, knowledge holders to do this. And they were actually the ones that asked us to do that. And so the first step is sahakis, or critical thinking, which relates to the project in that we needed to understand the spill and respond to the future spill. Secondly is nahata, or planning to develop sustainable solutions while increasing tribal capacity. And then third is ina, which is implementation by establishing emergency response goals. And then finally is sihasan, which is reflection, reflecting on the process, revising and adapting the framework, and doing that iteratively. Also, we worked with the Navajo Medicine Men's Association to disseminate our results. And again, they requested a decolonized, indigenized framework that centered the research process using the holistic Diné values and principles around health to understand the impacts of the spill within the context of historical trauma, structural racism, and assaults that the Navajo people have endured through generations at the hands of the US government. And so these are all the topics that fall into these categories within this framework. So instead of presenting the results of the focus groups where we had
Dr.
gathered.
Chief, this is Kristen. I think we lost your presentation, and someone else correct me if I'm the only one.
It's true.
Yeah, if you can try to share your screen again. Something happened that your presentation stopped sharing. Great, we're seeing it again, and we're seeing that slide with spiritual wellness, economy, and livelihood at the top.
Okay, apologize about that. So I was talking about this framework that we use to disseminate the results of the concerns that the people expressed in the focus group. And so, for example, for spiritual wellness, the people felt there were negative impacts to their use of the river for spiritual purposes. They were uncertain about the impacts to youth and their ability to continue on the farming and other traditions. In economy and livelihood, the people expressed negative impacts to quality of life, and that they experienced financial hardships because customers were not trusting their crops and not buying. People were unsure about the agricultural and the safety of the agricultural activities, and also the long-term impacts to health. In family and community, the people expressed distrust towards agencies, any kind of water testing. They felt that the leadership was not present. They asked who is advocating on their behalf. They also expressed that there was poor communication about the spill and the response efforts. And they also expressed mental health impacts where people experience worry, fear, depression, stress that amplified historical trauma. And then finally, in the environment, they began to have negative feelings towards the river, such as was it unsafe to use? Was it going to harm their cultural practices? And they were just hesitant to have contact with the river. They also began to use less of the traditional plants and herbs, which both resulted in damaging their relationship with the land and the river. They felt there was a silence in the environment, and again, they did not trust water quality testing. So to ensure that we were fostering our partnership, ensuring that we had transparent communication, and integrating traditional knowledge and concerns and everything that we did, we had a bilateral communication in a variety of ways. This included listening sessions, focus groups, teach-ins. We had a campus visit by the Navajo president and the VP to visit the labs, and then also be on a panel to share the impacts of the Gold Key mine spill on their communities. So the Navajo communities agreed that it was time to work together and to restore the community from the spill and to become more resilient into the future. So overall, there was many different parts to the project that were that built upon each other in different ways. We had over 100 students participate in various aspects of the research, and half of those students were they were Native American. So we had many opportunities to support the educational pathways of Native Americans in this project. So we greatly appreciate the funding that we received from the National Institute of Health, the Agnes Navajo Program, the University of Arizona Superfund Research Program. We also had internal funding from university libraries and many other centers that were participating in the project in different ways. So with that, I'll conclude my talk and be happy to take any questions that the audience may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chief. If people would like to raise their hand to ask questions, they can feel free and they can actually speak their questions. We're getting some applause that you'll see out there, people clapping their hands with their emojis. I did have one question. I know you mentioned a number of things about the bilateral communication, et cetera. How is the community staying engaged now that this is kind of in the rearview mirror, now that it's 2021 and this happened so long ago? Is there still a strong engagement over these types of issues?
Yes, we're still engaging with the community in terms of mining impacts and through the Superfund Research Program, primarily through looking at the effects of arsenic-laden waters and increased risk to diabetes. And as part of that mitigation, we're focusing on food sovereignty. So we've developed a program called Indigenous Food, Energy, Water Security, and Sovereignty, in which we're continuing to work with the Diné College. And there are many that have grown from this project, including Indigenous use and other research projects that the students are engaging around water security, food sovereignty, and even energy security. So one of our commitments is that, in building trust, we not only are there before, before a project is developed, because the project is community driven, but also that we're committed to working with the tribes for the long term and finding ways to sustain the work that we're doing and to build upon it. The community has expressed a lot of frustration for researchers that come in and do projects for short term, 3 years or 2 years, and then they don't hear back from them. So we've been able to continue to build off of this project in different ways.
Oops, that's great. I had trouble coming off mute. Natalie, did you have a question, and did you want to take yourself off mute and ask?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Chief, for that wonderful presentation. I was really compelled by your environmental pictographs and just all those ways that you went through explaining your scientific methods and the interpretation of them to the community. And so I was a bit surprised at the end there to see the distrust in the environmental water or the water quality testing. And so I was hoping you could give us more explanation to what you feel was the source of that, and what maybe could be done further in future work to help the community, gain that trust in the scientific side of the work.
Yes. So the focus group, which I didn't go into a lot of detail, was done in 12 communities. 12 focus groups in 3 communities over within 9 months of the spill. And the questions that we asked were to have the people think about their life before the spill, the impacts of to them after the spill, and what they think about long term. And so the water quality testing was really coming about when EPA and the various regulatory entities came in right after the spill occurred. And the river actually met agricultural standards within 3 weeks of the spill, but the people did not trust the results. And we found that a lot of that distrust comes from historical trauma, and a lot of the past U.S. Government assaults that came about from, land removal, relocation, uranium mining, boarding schools, and, it came about from people not understanding why the spill happened, why they weren't protected, why they had to incur financial loss. So there was a lot of distrust that was primarily aimed at the federal government and the regulatory entities that was associated with the history. There is a Superfund site there in Shiprock, and then another one nearby in Cove. So people are very aware of the testing going on there. So they just didn't trust the results that were coming to them because of that. And that's why when we came in, we had to really build that trust and to do a lot of communication. One of the things that we did that I didn't share in this presentation was that early on, the people were anxious to get results right away, because much of the results that were collected were not really available, because especially from the Navajo Nation, because of the litigation that was going on. So that information was proprietary. So for all our testing that we did, there was some time lag in terms of getting the samples processed and, doing all the analysis. So what we did in the interim was to talk about what we're doing, like talk about the process. This is what we're doing. This is why we're sampling here. And this is how we're sampling. And this is the next step. So we did like videos. We did, a lot of slides talking about how the soil was processed, how the water was processed, even the machines used to do the analysis. So we went into great depth to talk about the process and why it was taking so long. It wasn't because we're trying to keep the data from them. This is the process. And then from there, that distrust continued through years. It wasn't just that first year. And so that's why we continually did different things to build that trust, which are many of the things that I shared today. And so it took some time to build that trust. But I think involving the people in the process, through the citizen science, through the forums, answering their questions, that began to build that trust with the people.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you, Dr. Chief. I think we have time for one more question. I think, Alma, you had your hand up if you'd like to ask. Come off mute and ask.
Hi, yeah, I had a question, but it may have been answered in the previous answer, but I was just wondering what community engagement activity had been the most effective, and also if there was a difference between age groups, if one worked better than another, between like youth or older.
Yes, that's an excellent question. I think that the community forums were the most effective. And the community forums were, they changed over time. The chapter house is a place, it's a local government, and people go there to have discussions and to have their voices heard. Going to the community and being there to have those dialogues with the community, I think, was the most effective. But one of the things that we did was we did them regularly. We did them like every month, or towards the end it was every other month. So there was constant community engagement. In terms of the age group, what we did see was that we found many students reaching out to us, wanting to work with us. We had students reach out to us that were doing undergraduate research programs, or they needed to do a summer project. And so we included them either in the data analysis or even going out to collect. We had a lot of students volunteering these are Native American students, by the way, wanting to volunteer early on. And the elders had never seen this number of college Navajo students and Native American students coming back to their community in high numbers, wanting to help. So suddenly there was a meeting of this generation of these elders that were decision makers, that were farmers, suddenly seeing all these young people collecting this data, asking them, information about, where they're sampling, and then also presenting back to the community. I had several students that worked with me during the summer, and they presented their projects back to the community. So I think that was the most effective, was like the elders seeing the young people present their research project that happens to focus on their tribe, not necessarily their community, but you know, that was important to their tribal nation. So when an elder saw a young person that was from their tribe or that was Native American pursuing, you know, their degree, doing this work, they just their eyes just lit up, and they were just so much pride coming from the elders seeing these young people doing this type of work.
That's great. Can you hear me again? I'm putting myself on mute.
Yes.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Dr. Chief, for this presentation. It was wonderful. We've recorded it and we will make it available for people who couldn't join us today and for those who are on the line and may want to watch it again. We will be having
Thank
one.
you so much.
You are welcome. We will be having one more in this series in November. On November 12th, we'll be having Dr. Charles Lee from the EPA speak, and we will send an invitation to this group as well. So thank you again, and you see all the thank yous online as well, people